It gets me every time. Oh, excuse me. Oh, it's not like too loud. My heater going off. I think I got it. Just give it another minute and then we'll get started. Maybe I don't need this on. Well, it's getting kind of, I'm like, it's getting kind of hot. I was like, right, I have a heater blasting at my feet. I'm like, oh, maybe I don't need it. Hello and welcome to a special Streaming Parson Dig Delight Direct Drive DJ presentation. And today, I want to delve into a short story that I came across as I was doing research for a completely different video. But I was like, you know what? I kind of want to talk about an interesting dynamic in D4DJ because I haven't talked about it in a while. And excuse me, and that dynamic is the Maho and Saki discourse. And today, I am presenting to you the day Saki eclipsed Maho as a DJ. So welcome to the day Saki eclipsed Maho, a Streaming Parson presentation. Oh, hi Miko. So, I guess like some, preface before we actually delve into this. So this is kind of like a weird continuation a year later of A Song of Space and Soil, where I talk about the Maho and Saki dynamic, because I think they are one of the really interesting kind of duo dynamics within D4DJ's narrative. At least like a lot earlier. I know like my opinion has kind of changed on that in more recent times, but I really like the Maho Saki discourse. And when I made A Song of Space, okay, so hang on. 2 years ago, I made Saki and the Other, which is one of my earlier D4DJ video essays. And I made the joke in that video, like, yo, like, Saki, I can make multiple video essays about Saki, but of course, like, you know, 2 years later, and I still haven't gone through every single main unit character once yet. But then we have Maho and Saki. Oh, sorry, we had we had Saki and the Other. And in that one, I was like, you know what? Like, there's so much I could talk about with Saki that I could make like multiple essays on her. And then as I was doing that video, I was like talking about like the otherness of Saki, kind of one of her major character themes. And I was like thinking about, oh, I could do like a whole segment on Maho, like her and Maho being like contrasts to each other. I'm like, dude, that warrants its own essay. And then I made A Song of Space and Soil as that video. And then after doing that, I was like, dude, there's still so much more I can say about it. But I'm like, no, I can't just talk about Saki all the time. I need to get through all the main characters at least once. But I was like, after I did the D4DJ and Ghost presentation, I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to do another one of these. So here we are. Here I am doing another one of these PowerPoint presentations that I prepared for you beforehand. And as a continuation of the A Song of Space and Soil, because I thought that like there's so much more I could still say about Maho and Saki, because I think there's just so much to say about them, because they're when they early D4DJ writing, which I know like some people may be like, oh, you know, like D4DJ's writing is kind of like in decline as of late. But early D4DJ writing, they really like fleshed out some very interesting ideas. And it's kind of unfortunate that like some of them you never see, they never see the light of day. But the Saki Maho rivalry was actually one they kind of did play out fairly well, and then unfortunately they kind of rushed the last part. And that leads us to the day Saki eclipsed Maho. So there's a particular scene that we're gonna take a look at, and it's a scene in Crosby, which is crazy to think that like, oh my gosh, like Crosby is like 2 years ago. But I mean, that's how long ago they kind of completed this character arc, this kind of dynamic with Maho and Saki. 2 years ago, it's crazy to think. And then of course, like, yeah, they did other stuff with the story writing in D4DJ, but this was an interesting way of closing this character arc of Saki and Maho's rivalry that I kind of hyped up last year, but then like I made that essay well after the story arc was kind of over. What? Oh, that can't be good. Okay, okay. I don't know if I can't see like OBS because hang on. That's not good. That's really not good. I kind of wish there was a way to see this better. Oh, you know what? I kind of screwed up. There's a reason why I kind of hang on. I gotta change this. That would explain a few things. I was having trouble with. Hang on, sorry. Real high-end stream quality here, guys. Just give me a minute here. Okay, that explains a few things. I was like, why was I having trouble with this earlier? And now I know why. Because I am doofy and I'm a bit of a clown. Alright. Less of my face, cause yeah, whatever. There! Now I did it, that's better. But now I have to make sure that this works better. Yeah. Okay. Damn. That still didn't work as well as I wanted to. I'm trying to like make sure I can see OBS, but at the same time I can like still work with the slides. So just give me a minute here. Okay. I should have done a lot more of this like check before we started doing it. Oh, that's not what I want. Kind of want to have Hey Gauntlets, welcome to the stream. New haircut? Well, thank you. Yes, I did get a haircut. Because I was in dire need of it. Because I was getting pretty shaggy for a while there. Okay. Ah, that is how I fixed that problem. Okay, now I remember how to do this. Alright. Took me a while. I'm a little bit doofy on this one. Thank you for your patience. It's not the best solution, but I have a solution. Okay. Almost got it, almost got it. Okay, that was not as good as I thought it was going to be. Really should have checked this way before I started this. No, do not do that. Sorry about that. Aha! There you go. There you go. Now I got it. Oh, it took me so long. I should have had that figured out before I started. Sorry about that, but thank you for your patience. Anyway, let's summarize a little bit of Crossbeat's plot, as we need to get up to speed with what was happening that led to the moment Saki eclipsed Maho. So Crossbeat is a story that had like basically the world of DJs was being invaded by an artificial intelligence called Proto-Lumina. And in order to stop this invasion from this alien entity, Unicorn's Lumina, sounds terrible to say it this way, she conscripts the rest of the D4DJ cast to help her fight against Proto-Lumina. And so the big plan is to create this, like, to lure Proto-Lumina into kind of like a virtual D4 festival. The more I try to explain this plot, the more ridiculous it gets. But as part of that plan, they were gonna make like a song with all of the DJ unit, the main, I guess, 8 DJ units. And in the midst of this plan, they kind of break off into groups. All the singers kind of work together, all the DJs work together, and then you have like the VJs work together. And then there's like one more team. They help construct the digital environment. They kind of do like other background work. And so they kind of split up into different teams. And there's a scene that plays out where you have all the DJs working together. And the scene's really interesting because basically it starts with them not being able to work very well together. But in the midst of the chaos of the DJs trying to work together and being terrible at it, a certain star shines in the darkness. And we're gonna watch that clip right now. So let me just click this right here. And go.
だからそこは早いんだってみちる。忍が遅いから悪いのだ。今のは私のタイミングがベストですわ。みちるさん、やめましょうよ。
おい、せっかくスタジオ貸してやってんだから喧嘩すんなよ。
やっぱりあの二人を一緒にするとああなるよね。でも二人とも実力はすごくあるからきっかけさえあればうまくいくと思う。
葵さんがビシッと言ってやればいいんじゃないか。
自分がですか。
それが年長者の役目ってもんだからな。あの二人も実力を認めてると思うし。
でもそれなら春樹さんから言ってもらった方が。
俺はあいつらに舐められてるから何言ったって聞きゃしないよ。それにチームをまとめるのは俺の仕事じゃない。自分たちで何とかするもんだ。そうだろ。
確かに葵さんの言うことならあの二人もおとなしく従いそうな気がしますね。葵さん、ここは一つビシッと言ってやってください。
いや、そう言われても参ったな。
葵さんの欠点は優しすぎるところだな。リーダーとしての素質は十分あるのに。
いいから言った通りにやれって。嫌なのだ嫌なのだ嫌なのだ。どうしよう、このままじゃチームがまとまらない。あれ、さきさん。二人ともいい加減にしてください。さき、みんなが協力し合わないとチームは成立しないんですよ。もう子供じゃないんですから、いがみ合ってないで話し合いで解決してください。わかりましたか。はい。
はあ、やるね。
じゃあ皆さん練習再開しましょうか。
そうだね。
さきちゃんって言うときはしっかり言える子なんだ。まあさきは時々予測不可能な行動をしますから。でも
これでなんとかまとまりそうな気はしますね。
すごい。
I don't know why that's showing down there. You know what? Not really important. And I should have like turned off the other sound effects while we were letting that play. Oh, now it's awkwardly stuck with a black screen. But let's just move on to the next slide then.
だからそこは
There. So in that scene, there's like a lot of things happening in that scene. So with the DJs struggling to organize themselves, it's interesting that like Saki's the one who kind of has to tell Shinobu and Mitsuru to like, you know, start working together because you know, I need this because I changed the slide here, so oh man, it's so disorganized. There you go. With how disorganized the DJs were, even more so than me in this stream, it's kind of interesting that like the story even lays out that there were options of how the scene could have played out. Almost like on a meta level, they're like, oh yeah, we have these other DJs here that are the leaders of their team. And when we look at like Aoi being present, Maho being present, Mitsuru being present, although Mitsuru is kind of like not really known for her leadership skills, even though she's technically the leader of Unicorn. And then Haruna, to some extent, is the operative leader of Lyrical Lily. It's kind of interesting because Saki is not normally known for her leadership qualities, although I kind of pushed back against that idea when I was talking about how she's not given a lot of opportunities because Ibuki is the leader of Photon Maiden, but Photon Maiden's a very interesting unit because in a way all four members are highly competent and possess different leadership skills and different leadership qualities. And because Ibuki is normally the like logistical leader of Photon Maiden, you don't get to see Saki show leadership qualities because there's very little reason for her to. There's very little reason for her to. Whereas you think of like in other stories outside of Photon Maiden, where the D4 like at post D4 Fest stories where the characters are kind of split up, you have like a story I've referenced a bunch of times, like the Marine Summer Girls story. Toa shows a lot of leadership qualities. You think of the Genji, the Tales of Genji story, which I talked about in the Nagisa video. Noah shows a fair amount of leadership skills. As a matter of fact, there's also the Cutopia one, and once again, Noah shows a lot of leadership skills. And then, of course, Ibuki being the operative leader of Photon Maiden. You don't get a lot of opportunities to see Saki be a leader. But the scene really plays that very well, because it's interesting because when Maho and Saki first start talking in that scene, I don't know if I can go through it bit by bit here. Play scene. No, I do not do that. Okay, let's see if I can like fast forward this a little bit. It doesn't give me the meter. Hola, Fortune, welcome. I hope you are doing well. I'm gonna try and hit the pause button at the right
おい、せ
time
っかくスタジオ貸してやってるん
during
だか
this
ら
scene.
喧
There's
嘩すん
an
な
interesting
よ
line. As soon as Maho and Saki so Maho says, so Maho says like, oh man, it's really hard to imagine those two working together, Michiru and Shinobu. And then Saki goes, well, if we can get them to organize, there's a lot of potential. And there's an interesting thing there that Saki is doing that shows a strong leadership quality. Maho sees the surface problem, whereas Saki is immediately thinking of like, what can we actually get from the people that we have and the group that we have here? What can we actually achieve if we actually can start working? And Saki's already kind of thinking that far ahead. Even though like Shinobu and Michiru are continuously bickering about like, no, you gotta do things my way. I gotta do things. No, you do things my way. But Saki already sees the potential of what they can achieve if they work together. Whereas all the other DJs are all like scrambling, like, oh, like, can you two like, come on, what are you guys doing? We should try and work together to make this song happen. Saki is so smart. She sure is. And I think it's one of those things that, like, once again, we don't get to see too often because Saki is also very soft-spoken, which adds another element to her having certain leadership qualities. Now, this slide I have here called Taking Charge versus Mediatory Leadership. I think it's another thing, too, that downplays some of Saki's ability to be a leader. Because I think a lot of people, we traditionally view, like, good leadership a lot more with the mediatory method as opposed to the kind of person who takes charge, because there's a implication of like being authoritative, and of course like us as human beings can be like, there's a natural resistance we have when people are authoritative in the way that like taking charge, and the difference between, how do I put this without using the same words in a sentence? But when Maho leads Happy around, she doesn't just bark orders at them. She's very considerate of how to navigate each person's emotions. Of course, in Maho, the girl next door, there is some drawback to that, where Maho is too considerate of others, and then she kind of puts her own feelings to the side, and then that ends up kind of shooting her in the foot. Whereas like when Saki takes charge here, she just goes like, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna do it this way, and then just go for it. No other like words needed. And because Maho shows that hesitancy in that moment and Saki takes charge, Saki ends up showing that like she possesses a lot of how the DJs need to operate. And there's something else that's interesting about Saki taking charge, because I think we forget, because like the scene is meant to be kind of comedic, but there's also like a fair amount of urgency that Crosby is trying to present, because Proto Lumina is supposed to be like on a rampage through the internet and preparing to start sucking people's minds into the sea of electrons. So there's a level of urgency that for some reason all the other characters kind of forget. I don't know, like it's kind of doofy. But Saki seems to understand those stakes, and so that's why when she has that like, you know, petite mix animation moment where she's like, "You're not like, you are a warrior, not a child. Like act like it," is kind of her approach to telling off Michiru and Shinobu, because she understands the urgency, which is, I always found that kind of doofy in Crossbeat's narrative. Like, once again, I know the scene is meant to be kind of comedic, but they downplay the need for them to like hustle, you know, as DJs, which leads to like, once again, like Aoi is there as well, and of course, like Haruna, and they're the leaders of their own units. But for some reason, the story portrays them as like, okay, they're very like, this is a terrible way of thinking about it, but similar to Maho, I'll try and be as nice as possible. Similar to Maho, they want to be extremely considerate of their own teammates. That's why like they can lead their own units well. But outside of that, they don't show a lot of leadership skills. Even if you think of stories outside, once again, like the I guess the unit mix stories after the D4 fests. So I'm thinking of like the island resort story. I can't remember what the exact title of it is called, but it's the one with Aoi, Rika, Tsubaki, and Miyu. In that story, Aoi does not act like a leader. She's more or less just goes along with like Rika's suggestions and stuff like that, and even like Miyu acts more like a leader in that story. You think of like, once again, Haruna outside of keeping Kurumi and Miko in check, she doesn't act like much of a leader, even though she's kind of the operative leader of Lyrical Lily. And so they don't have a lot of real leadership qualities outside of just managing their own units. But what makes Saki kind of interesting is that she does. She can act like a leader outside of her own unit. I should have written this down on the PowerPoint, but an interesting story is the one where after the second D4 fest, after the second one, it's the one where it's like Saki, Miyu, Rei, and I'm trying to remember who the other person is in that one. Saki, Miyu, Rei. Is it Miko? I can't remember. It's the one where like they act as detectives, basically, and they try to solve some mystery involving like a candy store and like this mystery patron. And Saki acts like a leader in that story because Saki, she tends to take charge when she feels like there's a lack of organization within a group dynamic that she's in. Whereas like Maho doesn't seem to be able to do that. Like Maho, and I guess part of it goes back to like how they view their music. So back in A Song of Space and Soil, I talked about how one of Maho's problems as a DJ is that she's very rigid in the way that she plays music. For her, it's all about like following rules. That's kind of Maho's mentality. And part of that is like, okay, her parents are like civil servants, so like following instructions is what she's good at, because her parents are like that. Like between being a firefighter and a nurse, you kind of have to be good at following instructions. People's lives are at stake, and so Maho is kind of similar in that way. She's good at following instructions. But if she doesn't have that instruction sheet in front of her on how to lead, if you will, then Maho doesn't really know how to do that. She doesn't know how to take that initiative on her own. But that's where Saki is actually very strong. She is very like go-getter and takes the initiative. Of course, Saki's problem is that Saki can go wild with some of her like ideas, and then they can feel disorganized. They can kind of go all over the place, and it reflects in her leadership and also reflects in her music. And then of course in the Song of Space and Soil, I talk about how like the two complement each other, and that's why like they work well as a team. But of course like that only ever happens like once or twice, so it was a cool idea, but because you don't see it very often, you don't get to see it. You don't get to see a lot, like, you don't actually get to see it do work in the story. And so it's kind of like a wasted opportunity, I think, with Maho and Saki and their ability to work together. Now, I want to bring up an interesting caveat that I was thinking about, like, okay, so Saki is really good at reading the room. And that's going back to the beginning of that scene in Crossbeat. when Saki like kind of sees potential in Mitsuru and Shinobu, we have to address that she does have an unfair advantage because she's kind of they treat her synesthesia as if it's like a superpower, and so she can kind of sense these things as well that like Maho can't do because Maho isn't, you know, like a superhero kind of character, whereas like Saki kind of is. And I think that's something that like it's kind of a shame that Groovy Mix can't portray that very well, because as I mentioned in Saki and the Other, because you're stuck with like the 2.5D models, it's kind of hard to animate those animate Saki's abilities kind of and how they work. And this was something I talked a lot about in both Saki and the Other and A Song of Space and Soil, where in the anime they show off Saki's synesthesia, and it's an interesting way of doing visual storytelling of how we can see the world the way Saki sees it. And that's something that a lot, like, it looks cool on screen, but I think that's something that's kind of lost in the visual storytelling, is that we kind of don't get a full grasp because most of us that watch the show don't have synesthesia. So I think something that's lost is that you lose how Saki perceives the world and how she can navigate through it. The only times we see it is like, oh, she's like having this kind of feeling as she sees the colors. So many ideas Donuts games can play off, and what do? Storyless events. I know, right? Like, gosh, like there's a lot more that I will get to way later in this presentation about exactly that. So yeah, we'll come back. Put a pin in that one. But that's also true with, like, it's not just Maho that unfortunately gets like kind of sidelined in that scene, because like Aoi is also supposed to be a great leader, and Haruki even mentions this. But what's kind of lost in the scene is that they don't possess this unfair advantage Saki has, and it's kind of like, I mean, there's the whole joke about like Saki is kind of the golden child of early D4DJ, and so she's the one who gets to be like an anime heroine. Is one way of looking at her. Oh, I'm not allowed to make that joke again, though I've already made it 3 times. But Saki kind of has that unfair advantage, and the story heavily favors her in that way. So like her having a superpower basically gives her that unfair advantage. And I know, like, the reason why I bring this up is because I know someone could use that as an argument to say like, okay, it's kind of unfair to say that Saki eclipsed Maho. And the reason why I feel like Saki's eclipsed Maho completely is because, once again, Saki's proven herself to be Maho's better, and something Maho is known for, which is leadership. Like, the DJing thing is already, like, questionable, but now with the leadership thing, it's like, okay, what does Maho have over Saki, if anything? And there is, like, one more important thing to think about, and that is the fact that, like, I think a reason why Maho would not take charge in that scene is because Maho may feel intimidated. Because, like, okay, there's the adults in the room, like Saori and Aoi. And then, of course, like, Shinobu is in the room. And I think Maho's always kind of had a hesitancy to speak up and kind of act like an authority when there's like people that are better than her in the room. And I think that, like, I know it sounds terrible to say it this way, but when Maho is around Happy Around, she doesn't think that way. She doesn't think like I'm around peers. I'm not around people that are better than me. Not to say that like Happy Around is like lower skill level. Like, see, it feels like I'm saying that, but I don't think that's what's happening in Maho's head. But when she's around these like accomplished DJs, Maho definitely feels like, oh, I have no right to say anything. I can't be a leader in this setting. But one, Saki doesn't care, and part of it is the whole like country girl thing. She's kind of a She kind of feels like it's almost like an equivalency of like American rednecks when they kind of portray Saki's Hokkaido gal kind of persona, that she feels like she can just say whatever she wants, and it creates moments of hilarity in some of Saki's dialogue. But there's another thing too when you consider that Shinobu is in the room. So Maho would feel like intimidated to tell Shinobu what to do. But with Saki, Saki would not have this problem. And because of that, like, Saki has this high level of confidence, which Maho lacks. And that's because, like, throughout Groovy Mix, Saki has just been stacking the W's. Like, throughout Groovy Mix. Contrary to some of Saki and Toa's sentiments, in like the this summer my kawaii, there's like a moment there where Toa has like these certain sentiments of like Photon Maiden not being as cool as they should be. But I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, Photon Maiden, out of all the DJ units in D4DJ, and to be fair, like, they have an advantage being like a professional unit, is that these guys have just been stacking the W's ever since Groovy Mix started. So I have a list here of moments of like Photon Maiden just getting wins left and right. So even though I didn't put them in order, because technically the two D4 Fest attendees, main stage participants, they kind of happen. Okay, so okay, let me backtrack. Let's go in order, even though my list here is kind of out of order. But one of the earliest Groovy Mix stories with Photon Maiden is Eternal Dreams Bloom in the Night Sky. The story begins with them getting a modeling gig, even though, like, yeah, there's some nepotism in that. But Photon Maiden, modeling gig. The first D4 Fest, their main stage attendance, which was also like a follow-up to Road to D4 Fest. Photon Maiden. They actually get to I forget where it was. They perform in like a bigger stage. Their first like major concert, which I did not put in the list. That's a massive W. The two-time D4 Fest main stage participants, even though they didn't win either of them, because Piki Piki wins the first one and Call of Artemis wins the second one. It doesn't matter that they didn't win. The fact that they were main stage participants is a huge deal, especially in universe of D4DJ. And I've kind of made this running joke when I was when you look at like the Road to D4 Fest 2 Lyrical Lily, there's like a scene, and it bothered me so much when I was watching that video. I think I was watching it for the Miyu video. But there's this part where Lyrical Lily is walking through a part of town, and people recognize them. They're like, "Oh, you're a Lyrical Lily," and then Miyu or Haruna would be like, "Oh, you've heard of us?" I'm like, "You guys perform on the main stage of D4 Fest. You guys can't act like people don't know who you are." And then Maho does the same thing in Reach for the Light, the Maho-Saki relation story. Kanade, who is like Saki's mentor in Hokkaido, she mentions to Maho that she knows who she is. She's like, "Oh, you know, like, I love Happy Around, I love your music, I love your style." And then Maho goes like, "Oh, you know Happy Around?" I'm like, for crying out loud, right? You were on the main stage of D4 Fest. Who doesn't know who you are? Especially when like early, like Road to D4 Fest and Road to D4 Fest 2, they make a huge deal about like D4 Fest being this huge DJ event that's like a national event in Japan. And then like, then the characters go like, "Oh, you've heard of us?" after they performed on that stage. It's so doofy, and it's always like, I've always found that so weird. But the fact that Photon Maiden was main stage participants twice is a big deal, if you consider how much importance the story puts on the D4 Fest stage. And of course, like, there's a whole thing with a Bad Cynic Doggo in the main stage, and how Happy Around, what added a lot to their clout was because they won the rookie stage and got to perform on the main stage. And that was this whole story beat in a Bad Cynic Doggo to remind the audience that, like, yes, D4 Fest, even though we haven't had it in a while, is a massive deal. So that's a massive W for Photon Maiden. Then, there were movie promoters in the Cyber Police case file story. Basically, the TLDR is they get to dress up as like cops, and then they kind of promote a movie that's coming out, some police film, whatever, and then they kind of some shenanigans happens. Besides the point, cute girls doing cute girl things. But the fact that they were movie promoters, W. Road to D4 Fest 2 has them contract for an anime movie, and they like help build the album for it. Which it's D4 Fest 2 was mad doofy, and it's not just Photon Maiden, but there's like several story beats that Road to D4 Fest 2 introduces, and then it never comes back to it. The contract for the anime movie for Photon Maiden is one of them. Piki Piki being like an official resident DJ for like some beachside hotel. Yeah, that's never touched on. It was never touched on again. It's kind of silly. But anyway, contract for anime movie, massive W. And then you get to side origin, where they actually get to compete against Piki Piki because for some reason Yoba Academy includes like DJ performances in their student politics. Because why not, I guess? Art schools doing art school things, I guess. But winning against Shinobu there was a huge deal for Saki. Then you have D4 Fest America participants, which was one of the major plot points in Side Nova 7. And then there's a weird like competition Photon Maiden ends up in, and they it's like a kind of like a foreigner contest of like trying to find cuteness. It's like a weird story. This summer equals my kawaii. Photon Maiden wins that massive W, and then they even get a television commercial in the Chocolate Project story. So like Photon Maiden has just been stacking W's ever since Groovy. There's probably a couple more I forgot about. I was just thinking of like some main store, like Photon Maiden stories, but there's probably like other ones kind of in between other stories that I forgot about. But yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about like Photon Maiden and how much success they've gotten throughout their time in Groovy Mix and throughout the narrative. And so even though like once again some of these events I referenced kind of D4DJ's timeline is dubious at best. The timeline and Crossbeat's kind of like later in the timeline, and you could make the case that like the television commercial is kind of later, the Chocolate Project, because it was released later. Excuse me. There's still a lot there that like Saki has a bunch of wins by the time we get to Crossbeat, and that probably like really boosted her confidence. Now, coming back to the Yoba Student Council presidency vote point here, complete with a DJ match, victory over Piki Piki. There's another thing about that is important to address, and I kind of hinted at it already, but gosh, like D4DJ's timeline, trying to construct a timeline is dubious at best. And I have to talk about like a weird, what may feel like an inconsistency if you were to just read stories like linearly. And that is like, okay, so I'm gonna ask you guys to remember stuff that happened like several years ago. It's crazy to think we're in 2026 and I'm gonna have you guys think back to 2022 and 2023. But side origin, Photon Maiden which was the first of the side origin stories. That was released in November of 2022. And I'm going to use the Japanese server times because it makes it official. Because I know like when stuff gets like brought into the international version, stuff gets moved around kind of weird. And so it's not reliable at best. But Side Origin Photon Maiden was November 2022. But Reach for the Light, which was the Maho and Saki relation story, was released in January of 2023. Now the reason why this is important to bring up is because the win over Piki Piki in Side Origin, that is a huge deal in how they develop Saki's character and the Maho Saki dynamic, because it goes. See, this is where the dubious timeline thing is, that you look at Reach for the Light. Now, Reach for the Light, a major theme in Reach for the Light is the idea that Maho needs to accept Saki as her rival. That was like something like Kanade was trying to teach her. And Maho's like, okay, yeah, I kind of have to accept that. But of course, the story ends with them working together, and then they are combined song, which I've dubbed the Song of Space and Soil. You don't actually get to hear what it is. But that wins the Yoba Remix Contest, or Remicon, as it's called in Universe. And at the end of that story, Reach for the Light, Maho and Saki kind of make a declaration to each other, and in the presence of Shinobu, to kind of rub salt in her wound, because Shinobu is it where Photon Maiden is stacking W's. After the first D4 Fest, Shinobu is just stacking the L's. So, to rub some salt in Shinobu's L's, Maho and Saki kind of declare to each other that, like, you know, I'll grow as a DJ and I'll make a song that can win like a remix contest on my own. Like, I can do it on, like, I'll be able to get a win over Shinobu on my own, kind of thing. And they both kind of declare that to each other. And it seems kind of out of place for them to, if you were to read the stories linearly, well, that was doofully worded. If you read the stories linearly, someone might go, huh? Why would Saki need to make this declaration? Because Side Origin already happened, and Saki does get that win. But of course, like, if I was to try, like, once again, D4DJ's timeline is dubious. I would say that, like, okay, Reach for the Light is supposed to happen early in Groovy Mix's timeline, because there's like a thing the story does, and it's not the only story that does this. I think what some of the writers do, they write a story, and they want it to take place before the present era. So it'll start the story by saying, like, after a past event. So if you look at Reach for the Light and you start at the beginning of that story, it says, like, after D4 Fest. And so, to what I think, so, I mean, I'm willing to be challenged on this, but it's trying to say that, like, okay, the events of Reach for the Light happens before D4 Fest 2, or Remix. And the story specifies that, like, this story is happening after D4 Fest. Another example of D4DJ stories doing that is the Unicorn Needy Streamer Overdose collab story. That story begins with a timestamp that says after the D4 Fest America. The reason why they did that in the Needy Overdose story is because Needy Streamer Overdose was released after Crossbeat. But the story takes place way before Crossbeat. So that story begins with a timestamp, and then it proceeds to tell the story. But in the same way, Reach for the Light kind of does that, but it's very subtle. And you have to like unless you have these like dates memorized, it might be something that you might overlook. But I would say that, well, Reach for the Light happens early in the timeline. So Maho and Saki, when they made that declaration at the end of the story, they're like, oh, we'll get a win over Shinobu on our own. It happened early. And then you get Side Origin, Photon Maiden, which was released earlier, but happens later in a timeline sense. Saki gets that win. Saki gets a win over Shinobu. Because poor Shinobu is just stacking the L's. So, you know, just keep kicking her while she's down, I guess. But, unfortunately, Maho has yet to ever get this. Maho has not gotten a win over Shinobu in that way. So, that's where you have DJing skills. Saki has eclipsed Maho because she's done something as a DJ that Maho can't do and hasn't done yet. And that is getting a win over Shinobu. Then you had the leadership thing back in, we started the stream with Crossbeat, and Saki eclipses Maho completely. She's shown that she is Maho's better in both being a DJ and being a leader. And I kind of think that like that was an interesting way of, you see, it's kind of weird to think over like the years of Groovy Mix's narrative, because they kind of set up like, okay, Maho and Saki are supposed to have this kind of rivalry between each other, as Reach for the Light kind of establishes. Even though the problem with that story is that it was released a lot later. I think the writers had the idea of doing it, but they waited till they did the cross-unit relation stories, which was it's weird to think of it this way, but it was like a later invention in the story writing of D4DJ. Because they had the regular relation stories, and then they did the cross-unit relation stories later. And then they waited to do that. They waited for that to tell the Maho Saki story. Even though they had a bunch of other stories that happen that are supposed to happen after that event, if that makes sense. And so they had this interesting idea, and they wanted to play on this like Maho and Saki rivalry. But that rivalry doesn't last very long because, one, the story where Saki kind of shows she's Maho's better was already released before that story. And then even after Reach for the Light, they don't tell other, like, you could have done like other quote-unquote earlier in the timeline stories with Maho and Saki and have them compete, but it never happens. So you even get to like D4 Fest America, they don't compete. They're technically all teamed up against Abyssmare. So you don't get these moments of Maho and Saki competing with each other. And so there is no real sense of like rivalry between them, even though the story tried to paint this idea of like Maho and Saki could be interesting rivals with each other. But that leads to a deeper discourse within D4DJ's writing. And the real presentation you're watching is the lack of sustainable DJ rivalries in D4DJ, a Streaming Parson presentation. So, D4DJ has changed a lot since its debut in 2020, which is crazy. I think, oh my gosh, it's like 5.5 years almost. And in their debut, there was a stronger sense of rivalry when the original 6 units were introduced in the story, and they were written to kind of square off against each other in the newly revived D4 Fest. And in that story, Piki takes the crown for the first D4 Fest, and I think that was kind of meant, excuse me, to make them like a proverbial benchmark in D4 in Groovy Mix's narrative. But then the second D4 Fest happens, and then they just decide to move the goalposts entirely by, one, they introduce Call of Artemis, and then Call of Artemis shows up, They just like sweep D4 Fest remix, and then they kind of disappear after that, just poof into fat air. And so they were kind of, I think they were introduced into the story to be like, okay, they're going to be the lofty, faraway goal. And of course, another major thing with Call of Artemis, even before they're reuniting. There's gotta be a better word for that. Anyways, besides the point, when Shinobu like tries to have a DJ off with Toka, I think it is, in Road to D4 Fest 2 Piki. And the Call of Artemis members exist to be like this far away, lofty goal for the other characters to strive toward. Even like Piki. Even though the first D4 Fest kind of established them as being like quote unquote the best in universe. But then Call of Artemis exists. They were introduced and they exist to like completely move that goalpost to somewhere far more abstract. And then that also allows for like the other units to kind of catch up to Piki, which is a major kind of story beat for Shinobu. And I talk about that quite a bit in the Legacy DJ video. But basically, the narrative allowed for the other characters to kind of close the gap with Shinobu, because Shinobu was first depicted as being like the best DJ among her peers, if you will. And the in-universe logic was that she is by far the most experienced. She's been mixing tracks since she was like a kid, basically. And she learned from like arguably one of the best. And so, but that is completely like made void by Call of Artemis' existence. And then so you kind of have this like, okay, they want the main units to compete with each other, the main six. So Happy Around, Photon Maiden, Piki, Rondo, Mermaid, and Lyrical Lily. And they're kind of, this early Groovy Mix kind of set up that they kind of are supposed to compete with each other. But at the same time, on their off days, they're just cute girls doing cute girl things. So they're not really rivals either. And then the whole like, them not being rivals is solidified, and we move further away from sustainable rivalries in D4DJ with the introduction of Abyssmare. And that's the whole thing of Side Nova. So Side Nova introduces Abyssmare, and then that forces the main units to work together against a common foe. And then even that is downplayed, because at the end of that story, Abyssmare is forced to stay in Japan, and then the main units want to start being cordial with them, especially like Rinku, because that's Rinku's whole thing, right? To be cordial with them and make friends with Abyssmare, and of course Unicorn as well, because they're kind of there, right? So the whole like rivalry aspect of D4DJ kind of completely died after Side Nova, because the story really went out of its way to be like, no, we want the characters to work together. So, I guess we'll go over the slides a little bit. I talk about like, okay, here are the few like rivalries in D4DJ. So you have the Maho versus Saki, but Saki wins that rivalry because Maho has no feats, but Saki's stacking W's. There isn't a contest anymore. Eventually, at a certain point, Saki, you have to just declare that Saki is better, because she's the one with the W's. Maho's got no feats. It's not a contest anymore. And even though the ideas were planted in First Mix, and Reach for the Light, you know, set up the whole rivalry between them, well, no other story was written to suggest that they're actually still rivals. They don't function as rivals in the story. And especially like in current day story. Like when was I'm trying to think, like when was the last time Maho and Saki interacted? Like nothing since Crossbeat, to my knowledge. Which I think is one of the like, I'll come back to this because I'm kind of jumping ahead here. But with the introduction of like new units and stuff like that, like Abasinic Doggo and now Ego Egg, that's even less stories already from the few that we have of the main 8 units. Well, 6 units. We're not going to count 2 of them for a certain reason, but for the the 6 original units, there's hardly been any stories. Like, gosh, like, it's crazy to think that, like, Rondo hasn't had anything since the reverse stories, if memory serves. I think reverse stories, which was like, I want to say early 2025. Someone fact check me on that. I think it's early 2025 was the reverse stories. And Rondo hasn't had a damn thing since then, right? And so, like, Rondo's just getting the short end of the stick, and then, like, even, like, has Mermaid had anything lately? Like, not since reverse? No, they don't even have a reverse story. Like, Mermaid hasn't had anything in forever. I can't think of anything. Help! Fortune, help me out! I can't think of any Mermaid stories. I don't think they've had one in a while. Because they don't even have a reverse story to go with. Whereas Rondo does. And that was the last Rondo one, which is like a year ago. The point I'm making is that we have not had anything in forever. For some of these units. Lyrical Lily had the New Year story. But the New Year story is like, it's a weird, like, once again, you run into the dubious timeline stuff. Oh god, I don't want to go into that story right now. Not today. But going back with, like, Happy Around. Happy Around's last major story was, I think, the reverse story. Which that was primarily a Rinku story. Which was really just Road to D4 Fest 2 Rinku version. Was that story. I can't remember what the story's exactly called. But that one was like early 2025. So Happy Around hasn't had much. And with that said, like, if that was the last major Happy Around story, and that was a Rinku story, the last Maho story that I can remember, which I talked about it in the Maho video over a year ago, was the Hot Spring one, where they visit with Maho's cousin, Kaho. Yes, the D4DJ naming conventions at its finest. But with Kaho. But there's no real, like, there's no interaction with her and Saki, and I don't think they've had any interactions in forever. And like that, like, other than Crossbeat, I can't think of Maho and Saki interacting again since. And what, Crossbeat was early 2024. It's like, it's bad. We're almost a quarter way 2026, and we haven't had, like, any Maho Saki interaction for like 2 years, basically 2 years. It's crazy to think about it, which is crazy to think how fast time's going. Oh, but like there's been nothing for Maho Saki. I kind of feel that, like, Crossbeat kind of closed that arc because the writers weren't gonna do anything with Maho Saki's rivalry. They weren't gonna do anything with it, so they just kind of used the throwaway scene in Crossbeat to kind of say, like, yep, Saki is the winner. Moving on. Now we have the other, like, DJ rivalry in D4DJ, but this one is dubious because Shinobu and Machiro, the story goes out of its way to kind of show you that, like, you can't really compare them anyway, even though Machiro views herself as Shinobu's rival. But Shinobu's kind of like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Okay, yeah, last Rondo was April 15, 2025. Is that in the international or Japanese server? It doesn't really matter, I was just throwing that out there. I think you're looking at international. I thought it was earlier. JP, okay. Either way, the point I'm making is that, like, god, that's like almost a whole year ago. Because it's March 29th, 2026 today. April 15, 2025 is 300 and I want to say 46 days ago. Nope, sorry. 351 days ago. So 351 days ago, that was a long time ago, you know. Oof, Rondo. And Mermaid's probably even longer because they didn't even get a reverse story. But anyway, back to Machiro and Shinobu. Their rivalry is not really much of one. Like, the story tries to be like, okay, Machiro views herself as Shinobu's rival. And then you run into, like, Okay, Mermaid had the summer one. Okay, I forgot about that one. So, thank you for finding that one. I totally forgot that was a thing. But with Michiru and Shinobu, there's an interesting thing about their rivalry that the writers kind of try to divert your attention away from their rivalry. And that's the fact that, like, one, there's the timeline problem. So someone could make the argument that, like, well, Shinobu is the better DJ because she's whooped Michiru's ass on like 3 separate occasions. But that was like, what, Road to D4 Fest 2 Peaky? Which was a long time. And things have changed between that story and then you get to Side Nova. But Side Nova decides to go a completely different direction. Instead of saying like, oh, Michiru just closed the gap on skill level alone as a DJ, the story does something interesting with Michiru and how she DJs. And I would make the case that, like, the story goes out of its way to show that Shinobu and Michiru are better than each other at different things. So, with Shinobu is still better on a technical level. And that's just like her years of experience. But Michiru actually is better than Shinobu behind the DJ table, not because of her technical skill, but because Michiru is a better performer. And part of that is because, like, for Shinobu, she has, like, the other members of Peaky Peaky. So, like, Kyoko is just, like, oozing charisma. So Kyoko can just carry the performer aspect of Peaky's performance. Kyoko could just carry that because Kyoko is, like, a high-level performer. And then, of course, you have, like, Yuka and Esura. They kind of, they carry Shinobu's performer aspect of their DJ shows. But Michiru is a very good performer. And this is highlighted in Side Nova. See, this is where the comparison also kind of doesn't really work, because Road to D4 Fest 2, where Shinobu was kicking Michiru's ass multiple times, and Side Nova 7 are 2 very different time periods. But in that story, I don't think I've ever actually really talked about this idea. I've always had this idea in my head. And I was like, oh, this is actually a very interesting story beat that they did with Michiru in that story. But in Side Nova 7, there's the part where I'm going to rely on your decency of memory. You can look this up in Side Nova 7 Abyssmare if you need to fact check me. But in that story, there's the part where the first 6 units perform at D4 Fest America. And then you get Unicord before Abyssmare is supposed to perform. When Unicord starts a performance, Michiru tries speaking English to the audience. And this leads to, like, the funny ass moment of, like, Bob is taller than his father, Bob who moment with Abyssmare. But there's actually something genius about that scene and the way that they had Michiru do that. So, see, you have to think about, like, this is some meta level thinking. So, like, I'll try and level with you guys. So, in universe, the character, like, Abyssmare and their audience in D4 Fest America, they all speak English in universe. Even though we, the audience, hear Japanese from Abyssmare. In universe, they speak English. I've done this discourse a number of times. Abyssmare speaks English in universe. And so does their audience, because they're a bunch of New Yorkers. So, imagine you're at this, like, music event in New York. It's like JoJo's. Yeah, that's a good parallel. So okay, so imagine you're an audience member at D4 Fest America. And then you just had 6 groups of these Japanese girls. And they all speak Japanese. Now you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of weird. You know, we're at our American music festival. D4 Fest America or American music, you have like these 6 groups of like Japanese girls and they're all speaking Japanese. I mean, the music's good, but it's a little weird. It's a little weird, but I mean, the music's good, but it's a little weird. You're just listening to all these Japanese girls and their Japanese songs. And then Mitsuru goes on stage and she tries speaking English to them. Even though she's also Japanese. She's on one of these other Japanese groups. But Mitsuru distinguishes herself among all the other units. She distinguishes herself. That's something that Mitsuru just kind of intuitively figures out. And I was like, holy moly, that was genius that they had Mitsuru do that. Because Mitsuru is probably thinking like, oh yeah, I gotta make myself memorable. And while watching the other 6 units, Mitsuru figured she could grasp the audience a certain way. And it even works on Mitsuhashi's show to some extent. Because you have the background, the backstage scene with Sho and Neo. And then Sho's like, oh, that's Haruki's niece, huh? She's quite the character. And he's kind of like, oh, that's interesting that she would take this approach. And then, of course, you get the later scene, the Bob is taller than his father little gag, where Veronica is in the backstage. Veronica's like, what the hell? Like, this girl is not even making coherent sense with her English. Yet the audience is just like, she's got them eating out of her hand. Because Mitsuru is she's a very good performer. And is arguably better than Shinobu at that performer aspect. And it's not even the only time she does it. Because she kind of does it again, not on the same time with Shinobu, but there's another like Unicorn story, and Mitsuru, once again, she shows that performer side of herself. And she's a very good like stage performer. Which is not something you see Shinobu do often, because Shinobu doesn't have to do it. Usually it's Kyoko who does it. So they make Shinobu and Mitsuru good at different things. So it's kind of hard to compare them. And then even if you go to things that are like outside the music realm, there's like times where like Mitsuru would challenge Shinobu at video games or Beyblade or something. All of those contests Mitsuru has with Shinobu always end in a draw. The story will do something doofy to interrupt the game, and then you don't get a definitive winner. So the one that I remember off the top of my head was, I think it was the member card, the Mitsuru member card from the New Year's 2024? The Unicorn one. The New Star Unicorn story. I think it's like New Year's 2024. And in that, there's a member card with Mitsuru, and basically how that story plays out is Mitsuru goes to Shinobu's house and like, yo, let's play with like tops. It's basically Beyblade. And they continuously like tie in the game. They have like I think it's like 3-3 is their like score, and then they're gonna have a tiebreaker game. They're like, all right, this is the last game. Whoever wins this one is the winner. And then they throw their tops, and then Denojo decides to be a jackass, and he throws his top in there, and then he topples both of theirs. So it forces their game to be a draw. A video game example, there's a Mooney story. I can't remember which like story the member card corresponds with, but there's a Mooney story where they're getting into like a Mitsuru is trying to get Mooney into a certain fighting game. And then, because Mooney doesn't play fighters often, but Mitsuru's trying to get her into it. And then, Mitsuru keeps saying that like, oh, she's gonna eventually get she's gonna beat Shinobu at it. But then, the problem is, when Mitsuru and Shinobu actually face off in that card, Mooney gets upset because they're like, I thought you guys were supposed to be teaching me how to play, not like competing against each other. And then Mooney gets mad, and then Mooney leaves, so you never see the result of that battle. You never see the result of their game. So you don't know who actually is the winner. Because Mooney storms off, annoyed that you gotta go. Alright, you have a good night too. Thank you for dropping by. So with like Mooney storms off, and then like, you don't see the end of that contest between Michiru and Shinobu. So the story, the Michiru and Shinobu story is constantly interrupted, or there's always some other factor that you never see an outcome. And I think the writers were smart in like, oh, we always want to keep that one in the air with Shinobu and Michiru. You don't need a definitive winner. So those are your two major DJ rivalries in a nutshell. With like Maho Saki, Saki is the clear winner. And Maho is never going to close that gap. And then with Shinobu and Michiru, it never gets resolved. And the story tries to make it so that you don't care who wins, if there ever is going to be one. Now, let's just cover some of the other DJs real quick of the lack of rivalry in D4DJ. So, let's take a look at some of the other DJs. I'm just going to cover it real quick and why you don't have like a lot of DJ rivalries in D4DJ. Even though, like, once again, like the first D4 Fest kind of tried to establish that there would be rivalries, there aren't really any. So, Mermaid Saori, even though she's recognized for her high level of skill by both Aoi and Shinobu, since Saori frequently doubts herself and her DJing skill, even though like other characters say she's like quite an accomplished DJ and her level of talent, other DJs acknowledge her. Mermaid constantly glazes her. So you think that like, oh yeah, you know, Saori can probably take on other DJs quite well, but Saori herself, since she's constantly in self-doubt, she's not the kind of person to challenge anyone else. That's kind of how the story writes Saori. So there wouldn't be any DJ rivalries with Saori because she's not the kind of person to do that. She's not the kind of person who would get herself involved in a DJ rivalry. My throat's getting a little parched. You can tell by all the clicky sounds my mouth is making. So let me just give me a quick sec here. Then you have Rondo's Aoi. And Aoi, she's also not the type to go looking for DJ competitors. But unlike Saori, who's constantly in self-doubt, Aoi, she's mainly concerned with Rondo's brand. And by extension, Alter Ego's brand. Like, she cares about the commercializing, if you will, of her DJ unit, for them to be more famous, for them to get, like, global clout as musicians kind of thing. Like, that's what Aoi cares about. She cares about branding. And so, she's not exactly once again, similar to Saori, is not the kind of person to go looking for a competitor, a rival. Haruna is a small scale of that, where, once again, with Lyrical Lily's whole thing is like, oh, we want to go to different communities and share music and, you know, have a good time and spread joy through our music, which is the whole mission statement thing that Miyu gives when they started Lyrical Lily. That's Lyrical Lily's whole thing, is our mission statement is to spread joy through our music. So that's what they care about. Now, I did put it in the PowerPoint, and we'll come back to this, but in theory, Hitomi, who was introduced in the Arasugawa Student Council Chronicles, could make an interesting rival for Haruna. Because the story kind of establishes that, like, oh, Hitomi does know a little bit about DJing because she used to kind of think it was cool as a kid, but, you know, strict Catholic school girl upbringing is like, oh, you know, like, don't get involved in stuff like that. But Hitomi does reveal that she does have a knack for DJing and could become like a future rival for Haruna. And then finally there's Sophia and Michiru, and I kind of put them together. Sneak peek for an upcoming D4DJ video essay that I will probably have in it'll come out after Easter. But Sophia and Michiru, they're an interesting pair because the story goes out of its way to mention that, like, oh, they actually have very similar level of skill. And by that logic, they would make very interesting rivals. Because, as I mentioned before, the reason why, like, Michiru and Shinobu's kind of not comparable is because the story goes out of its way to tell you that, like, oh, they're better than each other at different things. So they're rival, like, you can't really compare them in their DJ rivalry. But Sophia and Michiru, they're a lot more similar. So you could, in theory, make an interesting rivalry. But the writers decide not to do that. Instead, Sophia and... I had a weird, like, tensing in my hand there for a moment. Sophia and Michiru, even though they had the potential to be rivals, they don't actually see each other that way. Instead, throughout their time, like, hanging out with each other, first in Crossbeat, and then it extends, especially in the Magic of Halloween story, they kind of see each other more like sisters. And then I will go into a discourse about this in an upcoming D4DJ essay, so sneak peek. But in the Crossroads of Abyssmare story, they have a very close connection to each other. And Sophia and Michiru view each other more as sisters. And, like, close friends, and they would ever view each other as rivals. Even though they, in theory, could make interesting rivals because of how similar they are in both their skill level and their performance levels. Like, they're both high-end performers, and they're both, like, roughly the same skill level as they can pretend to be each other in the Magic of Halloween story. But of course, like, even though there's all these possibilities that they could have done in D4DJ's writing to create DJ rivalries, they just decided not to do it. And of course, like, I've referenced this like a dozen times, but the reason why I don't think the writers care much for DJ rivalries is because it kind of doesn't really flow with D4DJ's narrative philosophy. Now, of course, say it with me now. D4DJ's narrative philosophy is the belief that through music, we are brought together as a community. And because of that, that's why the DJ rivalry things doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't matter. Because what's more important in Groovy Mix's story, in D4DJ as a franchise, is that we are brought together through music. So rivalries can be fun to read and write, but what is the most important thing is that we are brought together through DJ music. And that's why, like, there's even a line that's thrown around here or there, though you don't see it as much nowadays, because I think the writers feel like we kind of got it in your heads well enough, we don't have to say it anymore. But you think of, like, in First Mix, Maho frequently says the line, DJs bridge the gaps. Haruna says it once, I think, in, I want to say Road to D4 Fest 2 Lyrical Lily. And she also says, I think she says it in Olmex. I have in my notes that she says it in Olmex. I just don't remember what episode. Might be the first episode, even. But the idea is that, like, DJs bridge the gaps. They're meant to be, like, we are meant to be connected as opposed to at odds with each other or challenging each other and stuff like that. Like, that's not important. What's important is that we're brought together. So, community over competition. So, Groovy Mix builds D4DJ's world by bringing, like, the main units together with characters like reunions at the first D4 Fest. Even though, like, on a meta level, it's really, like, it's really just the writers trying to establish like cross-unit relations between characters as opposed to like pre-established lore. For example, like Maho and Dahlia knowing each other through karate, or Tsubaki and Kyoko knowing each other by being students of Airi. And then like Rei and Marika know each other because Marika and Rei's older sister are like good friends, stuff like that. Both D4 Fest events, and D4 Fest, this is kind of ironic, where the idea of like, okay, D4 Fest is supposed to be like this competition of like who's the best DJ unit in Japan, but then after like in the first D4 Fest, Piki's crowned, and the second one, Call of Artemis like sweeps and moves the goalpost. A major story element is the fact that all the units kind of get mixed up with each other. And the quintessential examples like the Cutopia one with like Saki, Kurumi, Noah, and Mooney. And they kind of mix the groups together because the overall theme of D4DJ's storytelling is we are brought together through music. And because of that, community is more important than competition. And that, of course, like carries over to the D4 Fest remix. So D4 Fest remix, they mix all the groups again because even though like, yeah, like Call of Artemis came to like show everybody like who's top dog, Call of Artemis is just kind of like, oh, we want to take away from the DJ rivalry and put the crown on some like distant goal that we may never get to ever again. And that's why they don't get stories. Ooh! But then you get right after that, it's like, once again, they mix the units and then you tell stories through that. Because what's more important is the characters working together, the characters, you know, enjoying life together. Then, of course, you get to like, okay, the DJs themselves, they team up in Crossbeat. Even though like these characters normally don't interact with each other much. Like, yeah, like there's Aoi and Saori because there's a lot of Rondo Mermaid stories, but like for example, like Saki and Shinobu hardly ever interact. And the only time like they're in a story together is when Saki's kicking her ass in music. So like they hardly ever interact, but then the story cares more about characters being friendly to each other and more cordial. And Crossbeat had them all unite against like an alien threat through like an artificial intelligence. This is mad doofy, right? Crossbeat, right? And then underneath that weird AI doofiness is just a family drama. So it's like, oh, the rest of you aren't part of this family? Well, you guys only get side roles then. Yeah, we don't need a lot of interaction with all the other characters. But whatever, right? Now, there is a potential for bringing up rivalries as an important story dynamic in Groovy Mix's narrative. And I've been flirting with this idea, although I guess I was totally wrong last year when I tried to make a prediction in D4DJ and Father Figures 3. I'm still believing for it though, because I mean, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't, because like considering how Donuts has mismanaged things. Please don't hate on me, Donuts. I wanna try and give you some advice, but just do Nova 3. Do the Nova 3 story. Just do it. You had an interesting potential of like how to reestablish rivalries with characters. With the, as I have dubbed it, the Arya Succession War story. Because there is a thing that D4DJ kind of flirted with when they did those reverse stories. The what was it? Happy Around, Rondo, Unicorn, Abyssmare, and Piggy. Yeah, they tell yeah, the 5 reverse stories. they were flirting with this idea of like, oh, we could bring up a rivalry story again in D4DJ. But I think maybe one reason why the writing of D4DJ decided not to do Nova 3 was because they didn't want to break down what they were already doing. With like everybody being cordial with each other, everybody being good friends, and not needing rivalries in D4DJ. Because Nova 3 would be a story about rivalry. It would be, if I was to think like, based on what I know on the reverse stories, Nova 3 would be about Neo challenging all the other singers. But at the same time, you can also you can maintain the, you know, D4DJ narrative philosophy by, and I believed this because the Peaky reverse story does a very good job of this. Is that even though Neo may have to compete with the other vocalists, she also has something to learn from all of them. And that was a highlight moment in the Peaky story when Neo confesses to Kyoko, like, oh, I'm kind of afraid to show my real self to the rest of Abyssmare because they expect so much out of me. And then Kyoko goes like, well, you don't have to be afraid. If they're really your friends, then you don't have to be afraid of that because they love you for who you are. And then Kyoko tries to give her anecdotal, like, that is true for us in Peaky, that we trust each other. And that's why we can be vulnerable with each other. And then that story ends with them, you know, just having a nice night under the moon, just looking up in the sky, being like, yeah, life is great, isn't it? And so there's a lot of potential. You can do both a rivalry and a you know, D4DJ narrative philosophy story of like, through music we are connected. Like in Neo's quest to succeed Irie as the new Arya, if you will, like she has something to learn from all the other singers, and you can take that as the opportunity of like, yeah, we're brought together through music, and that we can learn from each other. Oh, sorry about that. Housemates are playing Chinese opera upstairs. If you heard that, it blasted pretty loud there for a second, so like I assume anything I can hear, you guys can hear it. So sorry about that, but there's a lot Neo can learn, and so you can maintain both, like a rivalry and connecting your characters through music. Which leads to my other point here with like, okay, relationships over rivalries. So we already talked enough about like Maho and Saki, that like, once again, their friendship is more important, because going back to like the dubious timeline of like Reach for the Light happening early in Groovy Mix's narrative, because it's supposed to take place, it supposedly takes place shortly after the first D4 Fest. And then what they're like little subtle hints, although like once again, like, okay, this may just be me guessing at this point, but there are like some implications that Reach for the Light happens early, because I was thinking of like what's that one story? It's the one that it's the Annie Mello one, and then there's the I even talked about it in the Song of Space and Soil video. The one with Maho lends Saki like some manga, and then Saki does the OCD thing and reads the entire thing in one night. And then Saki kind of like talks about her love for this manga, and she reenacts a scene, and Maho gets all flustered because of how close Saki is. And the difference of those two stories is that, okay, so in Reach for the Light, Maho and Saki do not have each other's contact information. A corresponding member card, only I can know, the bathtub one. They don't know much about each other. And the reason why Saki goes into the bath in the first place is like, oh, you know, I want to get to know you. Even though like the bathtub is not the place for that. But just Hokkaido girl things, I guess. But, or at least the stereotype of them anyway. Not actually how Hokkaido girls probably act. But how City Slickers would depict them, I guess, is kind of how Saki's played off as. But in the Reach for the Light and Only I Can Know member card, they don't know each other all that well. But then you jump to like the Annie Mello story where Saki borrows manga from Maho, and then you get to Locked On, which was the Saki birthday card, the second Saki birthday card, which once again that was released before Reach for the Light. Maho texts Saki to ask her what she wants for her birthday, and so how do you go from like a story released later where they don't know each other all that well, and then you have like older member cards that have them be quite friendly and they exchange each other's contact information and stuff like that. But then of course there's like the weird, like, I know someone's gonna bring it up that maybe I'm wrong about this, but it's the one where it's the Stalker one, the Saki corresponding member card where she already has the binoculars that supposedly Maho gave her on her birthday, even though the binoculars are supposed to come after Reach for the Light, like a lot later for Saki's birthday. But then the binocular story is supposedly the corresponding member card with Reach for the Light, and it gets really confusing because they're like, oh, you kept that story element even though it's supposed to happen before, but you put it in a later event story, and it comes after, and it's treated as if it comes after an event that happens after the... Damn you, Groovy Mix, and your timeline shenanigans. I know most people would just tell me, like, Mike, you're overthinking it. Don't overthink the timeline thing. Just... But no, I can't, right? Like, I have to know. But... Yeah, but like, okay, you look at like some of those other like member cards that have Maho and Saki, they're a lot more cordial. The rivalry is never brought up because once again, their relationship as friends is far more important than their dynamic as rivals. And then Michiru's mentality changes in her rivalry with Shinobu. Michiru starts caring more about making friends post Sai Nova. This is the whole like her and Sophia kind of being like sisters. Post Crosby, they kind of act like sisters. And it's a great dynamic that Michiru has with Sophia. And it's one, this is where, like, as I mentioned before, it's really the 6 original units that don't get as much story development. Unicorn and Abyssmare still does, and I think one of the dynamics is the Michiru Sophia one, which I really like. And that will come up in a future video. Coming soon. And then of course, like, okay, you have Abyssmare's whole character, like Abyssmare's story arc in a nutshell is them putting aside their competitive senses to build relationships with other characters. That's Abyssmare's whole thing in a nutshell. But just because Abyssmare has converted over to the light side and joined the D4DJ narrative philosophy world of through music, we are brought together as a community. That doesn't mean that there isn't possibility that you can have rivalries, DJ rivalries within D4DJ. And there is a need, maybe there is a need for antagonists. And even though Crosby ended and it closed several story arcs, the Saki eclipsing Maho dynamic being one of them, there is possibility for other like DJ rivalries to emerge. So the first one I'll put is Maho versus Shika could be an interesting rivalry. So it would play as part of the Happy Around versus a Bad Cynic Doggo. Now what makes Shika interesting as a DJ, and what could make her a potential rival to Maho, is that Shika is actually kind of similar to Saki in that Shika's very much like, she cares about her like artistic freedom. There's actually an interesting story beat about that, where I think it's a Bad Cynic Doggo Part 5 or Chapter 5 or whatever. I'll just say Part 5. And in that story, Belle kind of tells the audience. Is it Belle who tells the audience? I can't remember. I think it's Belle that tells the audience. She tells the audience that like Shika's past, and Shika was once like scouted out by professionals to go pro with her music, because Shika's also like a very accomplished piano player. And Shika denies the offer because in Shika's mind, she's like, no, I'm not like, I don't care for the corporate music world. I care more about my artistic freedom as a musician. And so, because Shika has that mentality, she kind of, it's not exactly a one-to-one, but she is similar to Saki in her whole like intuitive music and her intuitive musical composition mentality. And you can reintroduce that to go against Maho's technical strictness, which was the original dynamic that they tried to build in Reach for the Light, as I explored in A Song of Space and Soil. So Shika could, in theory, be an interesting rival for Maho. Of course, the problem is like, okay, Abasani Doggo has like their main story, and then the summer story. Well, technically it was like a half anniversary thing last year, and then it was kind of like a pseudo summer because like it's a swimsuit story. So I'll treat it like it's a summer story. So like Abasani Doggo hasn't had much, but if they were to come back, I think like you should go the rivalry route with them, because that's also like a major part of like what made Aimi an interesting character, or Emi, I should say Emi. Emi, an interesting character, is that Emi opposes Rinku on an ideological level, and that's why you can create this kind of like rivalry between Happy Around and Abasani Doggo. And then you can also include that, can extend to the DJs, because they're fundamentally different, except on the whole like Shika kind of does care about like building community, the DJs bridging the gap thing. But I think there could be an interesting rivalry between Maho and Shika if they bring back Abasani Doggo. And they actually, I mentioned this in the anti-Rinku video, that what would be interesting to see is that Amy could be like a reoccurring villain. You can kind of have her keep showing up to like Happy Around stories and they keep competing. That would be an interesting dynamic. Of course, it'd be hard to write that multiple times, but considering you're trying to, one, you gotta get a new Happy Around story and a new Abasani Doggo story, and then try to make a series out of that would be incredibly difficult. But anyway, that's besides the point. The point I'm making is that with the rivalry, you could make an interesting rivalry between Happy Around and Abasani Doggo, and that can extend to the DJs. So Maho versus Shika would be a very interesting rivalry. Then another one is Haruna versus Hitomi. That's another possible DJ rivalry you could make. I put it here like Lyrical Lily versus the Arasugawa Student Council. Now, there is a bit of a hole with this one, and the reason why this one doesn't quite work as well, it doesn't quite work in my head as well as the Maho Shika one does. And the reason why the Haruna versus Hitomi one doesn't quite work as well is because the real beef is between Haruna and Sakuya. But Sakuya is not the DJ. Hitomi is. But you can still try and build a DJ rivalry between Haruna and Hitomi, even though like, yeah, the real conflict is between Haruna and Sakuya. And even though like the writers of the Arasugawa Student Council Chronicles kind of squandered that, because oh god, I hate thinking about it, but in the Arasugawa Student Council story, I did not like the ending. I really disliked it. I talk about it quite a bit in the Vindictive Viola, that they kind of made Sakuya into like a comical dipshit villain character, where like she's not an antagonist for an interesting reason. Because the bulk of the story is like, okay, you're portraying that she's a villain because she has like personal beef. And I was thinking like, And it was funny because the James Gunn Superman movie came out roughly the same time I was making that video. I was like, damn, if I had seen that movie first before I made the Vindictive Viola video, I still would have incorporated it. But the idea that like Lex Luthor just hates Superman and everything he does is out of that hatred. And the first part, the bulk of the Arasagawa Student Council story portrayed Sakuya that way. And I thought that was interesting. I thought that was a very well written character dynamic and how to create a villain in D4DJ. But then they decided to just squander that completely and be like, no, actually Sakuya is bad because she's bad. And everything she does makes other people's lives miserable, as played out with Ayumi. And I was like, what? That was so dumb. I did not like that ending. I would have liked it they just stuck to their guns and just made like Sakuya just have personal beef with Haruna. And then you could carry that to future stories, especially if you made a DJ unit out of the Arasagawa Student Council group. And you made a DJ unit out of them. You could have done something interesting with like, yes, continual beef with Sakuya and Haruna, and then Hitomi being used for that, and create a DJ rivalry that way. I think that would have been a very interesting way of going about it. But no, they squandered the ending of that, and I did not like it. Oh, I gotta save that rant for another video. That story still angers me to this day, as you can tell. And finally, the last set of possible like DJ rivals / antagonists is Ego Egg. And there's potential. There is potential in the introduction of Ego Egg. Because there's a whole thing with like Ego Egg's whole thing is that like they compete with each other within the unit. So you can run an interesting like DJ rivalries with just them and each other. And what's actually been interesting about Ego Egg so far is that they managed to write a story about these characters and keep it self-contained. In that like Ego Egg's story exists with just Ego Egg. It's not like a Bad Cynic Doggo or the Arasagawa Student Council where they're kind of reactionary. So a Bad Cynic Doggo is in reaction to Happy Round, and the Arasagawa Student Council Chronicles is in reaction to Lyrical Lily. But what makes Ego Egg interesting and to try and make DJ rivalries is that because they don't involve the other characters, you can try and keep them separate, and then you can even divorce yourself, if you will, from the D4DJ narrative philosophy. You can tell a story that says, okay, we're going to ignore the D4DJ narrative philosophy with Ego Egg, and then tell an interesting story of them competing with each other. That has a lot of potential. Of course, like, one, it's kind of too early to tell with Ego Egg. I haven't read into it yet with Volume 4 that just came out. Part 4, Volume 4, whatever. But with the way that Volume 3 ended, with the four of them being together, and the story is obviously that like there's tension between them still, even though they're all brought back together. There's still tension between them, and that has potential of creating like interesting DJ rivalries. So we'll see what they do with Ego Egg. I feel like the writer's gonna drop the ball somewhere. I just feel it. Like, they've already dropped the ball with, I don't have a lot of faith after like the Arasagawa Student Council try to introduce like antagonists or like DJ rivals, and then like just completely drop the ball. I have a bad feeling that might happen with Ego Egg. Maybe, hopefully they prove me wrong. Maybe Ego Egg they'll write an interesting DJ rivalry story. Even if it's just with each other, that would be good enough. If you could somehow incorporate it to like the broader D4DJ world and have them actually challenge the D4DJ narrative philosophy, I think that would be like, well, that would take a very high level skill of writing, which I wouldn't be able, like, I couldn't tell you how to do that because I wouldn't know how to do that. So I'm not going to expect something out of them that I cannot do myself. So, or even conceive myself. But I think Ego Egg has potential to be like, to tell an interesting DJ rivalry story. So maybe hoping, but you know, don't expect too much at the same time. Anyway, thank you for watching my D4DJ presentation on the day Saki eclipsed Maho, or more accurately, the decline of DJ rivalries in D4DJ. So that is my presentation. It's a shorter one this time because I'm not doing a huge psychological profile analysis like I did with the last one. But at the same time, I like doing these. I hope you guys like me when I make these. And do longer like discussions and discourses, because one of those things that like, and I mentioned this, which is crazy, things already a year since, but when I did the Toa video last year, well, the April Fool's video last year. No, I'm not doing one this year. This was originally going to be that video, but I realized that April 1st was also the day the Mario movie came out. So I'm like, oh yeah. Not stream that day. But anyway, just like I did in the April Fool's Toa video, I kind of like just being able to express my thoughts more unfiltered. Whereas like, you could, like all my videos obviously have to filter through like tons of thoughts, because like I could ramble on more about DJ Rivals if I wanted to. Of course some of it would be repetitive, but that's besides the point. I could keep talking about it, but the videos are meant to really concise, like put my thought concisely. So my closing thoughts, I guess, is like, even though D4DJ, they move away from the need of rivalries, because they want to stick with their narrative philosophy of like, okay, we're brought together through music. There's also some like funny writing things that they have, but the problem is that like, as of late, Donuts has not handled it very well of like how to progress other stories. Like after Crossbeat was the last major story, and then the reverse stories, I thought they were gonna like start a new kind of interesting volume after the reverse stories. But when you look at it in hindsight, it's like, okay, like you don't want to do the Nova, you don't want to do like the Nova story 3 times in a row like that. Well, I guess Bad Cynic Doggo was before that, but, which was meant to be like the break, if you will. But then like, I don't know. Well, not even that. They had both the Bad Cynic Doggo and the Arasugawa Student Council. And then they did the reverse stories. And I thought like, okay, Bad Cynic Doggo and the Arasugawa Student Council stories, they would have been like a good enough break. And then you could do Nova 3. Because the story, like, you go through Sai Nova and Crossbeat, and then you go through the reverse stories that they release after the Arasugawa Student Council Chronicles. It just felt like, okay, the writers are gonna do Nova 3, like as a the Nova story as a trilogy. But then they didn't do it, because now we're doing Ego Egg, and I just thought that was like, oh, that's interesting. But there was still potential to do like quote-unquote rivalries. It wouldn't be DJ rivalries per se, because it'd be Neil and the other vocalist. But there would still be like rivalry in that story, and once again, like, just, I don't know, just brainstorming some ideas of like how you can incorporate both like the rivalry aspect and the D4DJ narrative philosophy of people being united through music. I think there was so much potential, but then maybe, you know, hoping for volume 6 we'll get Nova 3. I don't know, but we'll see what they do with the writing. Will they do more rivalries? Because that would be an interesting thing for them to do. Of course, the big problem is that, like, once again, like, Donuts has been really, really lazy with writing as of late. Because there's, like, a lot of event stories that have not been, like, a lot of events that happen in the game, but there's no stories with them. Like, we had both Valentine's and White Day pass, and there were no stories. That's a massive move. Like, what was the last story? Like, New Year's? Okay, that wasn't Eagle Egg. The last like story involving one of the other units was like what, New Year's with Lyrical Lily. That's bad. I mean, that's 3 months ago, more or less, right at the end of March. So 3 months have passed, and we haven't had any real like D4DJ stories. That isn't Eagle Egg. Not that Eagle Egg is terrible. I mean, it could be better, but there's other reasons why it's not as good as like what they could have been doing with like the main units and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure people would have loved to see like Maho and Saki hanging out. Or one of the most wholesome ideas, I was going through some notes. More shameless sneak peeking here. But there was like a part in the Crossroads of Abyssmere story where Michiru's talking about like how sad she is because Sophia might move back to New York, and Michiru's like, no, like I wish we could have more time just to like hang out, go to coffee shops together, something like, you know, a story of just Michiru and Sophia doing like casual things, just hanging out. Like, you don't need a major element. You can just have like two cute girls doing cute girl things with like a story like that. People would love a story like that. I would love, at least I would love that story. I'm sure a lot of people would share this, would share that opinion with me. Is that like, imagine you just told a story with like Michiru and Sophia just hanging out. That would be such a sweet story, but like, no, they haven't been doing that. And then like, when you compare like, we didn't get a Valentine's or a White Day story this year. Gosh, we don't get an Easter story, like, bruh, like, that's getting cooked. Like, Donuts is, oh man, it just gets worse. If you don't have an Easter story, like, gosh, that's just beyond bad. You already missed 2 holidays, man, so that's pretty rough. And it's a shame, because you compare, like, past years, like, one of the best stories in all of D4DJ was a Valentine's story. The mutual feelings conveys emotion. The Rika Tsubaki story. One of the best stories. It was a Valentine's story. And then you compare it with this year, it's like no Valentine's story. Like what? It's bad. It's an oof. So that's why like it's hard to want to have hope to like, oh come on, like do Nova 3. Just do it. I want to say I would hold out for it, but I don't know if Dona's ever gonna do it. Sucks, but it is what it is. I will still be making these videos though for as long as I can maintain interest in like D4DJ storytelling, even though like storytelling is kind of dying in D4DJ, which is unfortunate. But I will still get through all the main characters first, and then maybe do other videos. I do plan to do another one of these presentation streams in the near future, because I kind of like these. I really enjoyed the Halloween one, and I'm having a lot of fun with this one too, so maybe we'll do another one in the near future. But that's going to be it for this presentation, so I'll leave the floor open for a couple minutes if you guys have questions. Otherwise, then we're going to end the stream soon, so yeah, give you guys a couple minutes. I'm going to enjoy this banana cake while you guys submit questions, if any. And it could be any D4DJ related question. It does not have to be just pertaining only to this presentation. And I really should not have done that when I already had a piece of the cake in my mouth. That's so good though. This is the memory card I was referencing when I was like, oh yeah, Saki has binoculars already. This is the corresponding Saki member card of the Reach for the Light. She already has the binoculars that Maho gifted her in the birthday member card, even though the birthday member card should, in theory, happen a lot later. I also just really like poking fun at his member card because, like, Saki's being like such a stalker. I'm like, bro, like, if you saw this kind of thing happen in real life, it'd be like, bro, that's so messed up. But how does the old saying go? Stalking is totally okay when it's a cute anime girl doing it. Also the high elevation thing, as I mentioned in the Song of Space and Soil. Saki's like high up. She's peering down at Maho. It's super creepy when you say it out loud like that. Okay, we're gonna do some housekeeping before we end the stream. So, yes, because I was working on this presentation, you're gonna have to wait at least another week. It'll probably come out just after Easter, but I will have the next D4DJ video essay, even though it'll be like 4 weeks since the last one. It'll come out after Easter, so D4DJ video coming up, but don't expect it too soon. It's going to be another week for it. And of course, for this week for streams, we are doing the quintessential quintuplets, 5 memories spent with you, tomorrow and Thursday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. So nothing out of the ordinary there. With that said, this is going to be the end of the stream. If you guys enjoyed this D4DJ presentation, I will see you guys tomorrow for quintessential quintuplets. Until then, I hope you guys have a good rest of your night, and God bless you.